Hello, everyone, and welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. My name is Alex Schaffner. I'm the events director for the bookstore, and I just want to thank you all for being part of our community today. Whether you know our store well or if you've just heard about us for the first time because of the authors who are here tonight, we appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate your support of three amazing writers and an independent bookstore by being here. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by three truly excellent writers, all with collections that have come out in the past several years, which have been extremely well received by me, our staff, our readers, and the world at large. Truly, I love everybody who's here, and it's really exciting to have them all on one screen. So we have Brandon Taylor, Nana Nkweti, and Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I am sorry to share that Danielle W. Moniz, who had planned to be here, is suffering from a lack of Wi-Fi. So very, very sorry she's not here tonight. If you have not read her book, Milk, Blood, Heat, you should read it, even though she isn't here, because it is sort of warm and spellbinding and, well, does a lot of gut punches and is just one of the best collections that I've read in the last couple of years. So a quick introduction of our panelists. Brandon Taylor is the author of the 2021 short story collection, Filthy Animals, a national bestseller, and Real Life, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and named a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. Brandon's fiction is taut and finely tuned, and he builds extraordinary atmosphere and thematic cohesion out of the smallest pieces of settings and senses. His stories rail against loneliness with characters hungry for intimacy, often running up against brutal distance. Nana Nkweti is the author of the 2021 collection, Walking on Cowrie Shells. She is a Cameroonian-American writer and AKO Kane Fiction Prize finalist, whose work has garnered fellowships from MacDowell, Kimbilio, UCross, and the Wurlitzer Foundation, and several others. Nana's stories dance across time, place, and genre, combining riveting character work with dexterity and versatility, with stories that carry us from nightclubs to zombie outbreaks to mermaids and comics conventions. Her stories are striking, imaginative, and not easily forgotten. Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah is the New York Times bestselling author of 2018's collection, Friday Black. He was selected by Colson Whitehead as one of the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35 honorees, is the winner of the Penn Gene Stein Book Award, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Award for Best First Book and the Aspen Words Literary Prize. The stories of Friday Black unfold in heightened reality through urgency, singular observation, and intense creativity. They rebuild the world into something that's both greatly recognizable and wholly new, and are truly exciting and sometimes terrifying to read. All three of these are spectacular writers, so good at what they do, and it's really wonderful to have them all here today. So thank you so much for joining us, Brandon, Nana, and Nana. It's really exciting to me. So I would love to start off with a little bit of reading and a question for each of you. Brandon, would you like to start?
Sure, and we're doing a short reading, right? That was the perfect. So I'm just going to do a very short reading from the first story in Filthy Animals. It's called Potluck. Lionel had been out of the hospital for only a few days when the potluck invitation came. The host lived in the first floor apartment of a Near East Side duplex, separated by a tiny cul-de-sac from the wide bottom cottages that fronted Lake Monona. Noise of an undifferentiated party variety drifted out into the deep blue cold, meeting Lionel under the sunroom window where he had stopped to peer inside. He felt powerfully anonymous out there in the dark, looking in on all of them. That he did not recognize anyone apart from the host felt at once a comfort and a warning. A rectangle of pale light unfurled down the stairs as the host pressed the door open on screeching hinges. "Shit, it's cold out here. You walk all this way?" Lionel climbed the stairs and tried to arrange his stiff face into a friendly expression, the effort of which made his scalp tingle. He had walked only part of the way, about 10 minutes in all. The bus had dropped him on the other side of Orton Park. When the host realized that Lionel wasn't going to answer, he said, "Well, you're right on time." I didn't have a chance to go to the store. I just got back, Lionel said. The several pairs of shoes in the front hall indicated to him that this was not the small gathering he had thought it would be. It also indicated that he was not right on time, but he knew that already. Long trip? The host wrapped his arm around Lionel's lower back and pulled at him until they were very close, at the threshold of the apartment, but not yet inside. Good? Couple weeks, Lionel said. Sorry for not being in touch more. It's a busy time, the host said, in a way that wasn't entirely not passive aggressive. Lionel turned his head a little out of reflexive guilt, and the host's dry lips grazed at the corner of his mouth. Thank you, Lionel said. It's good to see you. Let's talk tonight. Catch up. It's been forever. Yeah, let's. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Even in that brief reading, you get such a strong sense of atmosphere and the way that characters engage sort of uncomfortably, but so compellingly in a lot of your writing. You're really well known for your debut novel, Real Life, and it's long and it has a novel scope, but it also has this sort of relentlessness of turning individual phrases and very small pieces of what's observed, like physical objects, smells, temperature of the air, all of these things bend towards the emotional center of the book in a way that I really associate with short fiction as well. So do you find that one of these forms is more natural to you and you exercise more to write the other? Or do you just have a lot of stamina for making somebody feel that way for that many pages?
Oh, well, I love what you say about all the parts of a novel or a story bending toward the emotional center, because that is how I think, and that is how I experience narrative. I'm always trying to find like, what is the shape to the gravitational field of the narrative. In terms of like what form I feel more natural in, it's always the short story. I think that short stories were my first love as a narrative storyteller. They're the form I come back to again and again. It's the form where I feel like I have something to say. I consider novels like a very needy form in a way that a short story kind of isn't. You know, like a short story doesn't need you, but a novel feels like endlessly needy in its capacity to like strip the life from your bones. And I love the short story. It is my sort of default narrative form. And what I enjoy about writing stories is that I feel like I'm always writing stories in constellations. I can't sit down and write a standalone story. I'm always writing stories in these like sort of super structures. So I'm always working on not on one story, but one story as part of a larger corpus of stories. And when I sat down to write Real Life, I was like, I have never finished a novel before, but I have written 10 short stories. I know how to do that. So I'm just going to like, whenever I feel overwhelmed by the scale of the novel, I'm just going to think, this is just like 4 more short stories and I'm going to get to the end of this book. This is 3 more short stories and I'm at the end of this book. And so whenever I'm struggling to get a handle on the shape of a narrative, I try to conceive of it in terms of short stories, because that helps me think about it, because I know what the shape of a short story is. I know what that feels like. You know, a novel can feel just like, where does the horizon end? Like where? But with a story, I'm like, I know what 4 short stories in a conversation feels like, you know. And so whenever I struggle with a novel, I try to like take it back to what for me are first principles, which is the short story.
A wonderful answer. I have another question, only because you write a lot about the Midwest. And when you said the part about passive aggression and there was the weather, and just I had this sudden question. If there's not a Midwestern Gothic, would you like to create it?
Well, I mean, I think there certainly is a Midwestern. I mean, at least in painting, right? Like there is certainly.
Oh, for sure.
There, and Willa Cather got there first and early, you know, like Willa Cather knows all about, and Louise Erdrich, you know, she is so tuned to the particular Gothic impulses of the Midwest. I mean, I'm not from the Midwest, I'm from the South. And so I think being from the South, it does imbue my sort of natural hue with a bit of the Gothic. Like, and so maybe me writing about the Midwest feels Gothic because being from Alabama, everything is Gothic and Baroque. But yeah, I mean, I love the idea of a Midwestern Gothic. I think we live in it I think people in the Midwest are already deeply steeped in the Lutheran Gothic of it all. But yeah, I love the idea of a Midwestern Gothic. I just think that Louise Erdrich and Willa Cather got there well before I was even conceived of.
Good answer. Let's see. Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, would you like to read next? There's not a short way to distinguish between nanas, I now realize.
For sure. I'm going to read from the short story in my book called Things My Mother Said. It's about things my mother said. My mother's favorite thing to say to me was, I am not your friend. She'd often say, you are my firstborn son, my only son, as a reminder not to die. She loved saying as a way to keep me humble, I didn't have a mother. You're lucky. You have a mother. When the TV went dark, my mother said, good. Now you can read more. Then our house at the bottom of a hill lost all its life. Gas, water, electric. One day I came home to the warm smell of chicken and rice. I hadn't been able to steal a second burger at the cafeteria at school that day. My stomach whined. At home, the fridge had become a casket bearing nothing. The range and oven had become decorations meant to make a dying box look like a home. Hunger colored those days. Where is this from? I asked, already carving out a healthy portion from a worn gray pot. My mother pretended she didn't hear me. She was studying the pages of her massive white Bible at the kitchen table. Wide sheets of light pressed through the window and draped her. She spent her days reading that big Bible. Its pages wore to film as her fingers fluttered from psalm to psalm. She'd be asleep by the splash of dusk. I, on the other hand, would be up for hours, trying to do homework by the blue glow of my cell phone, clinging to its light until it died. At night, hunger and I huddled together. I'd fall asleep thinking one day I would change everything. That afternoon, I ate the chicken and rice. It tasted like pepper and smoke. How did you make this, Mom? I asked again. She looked up from her Bible. Ah, Radia, did you pray over your food? Did you say your Psalms today? I ate the food quickly, greedily. I chewed the bones till they splintered in my mouth. Another thing my mother often said, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Later, when I was in the backyard, hesitant to return to the dying box, the sun dipped away, I found a patch of charred grass and a small circle of blackened stones and pebbles, an ash moon branded into a sea of wild green grass. I touched a gray rock partially blackened by flame to see if it was still hot. I felt proud and ashamed. For the record, I know I was lucky. I know I'm lucky. I don't think you're stupid. I know I'm not your friend. I hope you can be proud of me. So that's that story.
Phenomenal. Yeah, that's one that I think of all the time because it's so brief, but it carries so much in something like 3 pages.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So a lot of your stories, I think this one, not necessarily in the same way, but something that I like about a lot of your stories is that they have something like almost a neon quality to them, where, like I said in the intro, you can recognize our world and it can map against our world, but whatever mechanics you use to get there, in a lot of your stories, there's sort of a heat and a brightness that makes you feel lifted out of normal reality into this sharper version of it. And I'm wondering, first of all, whether that is how it feels to you as the writer.
Right. That's such a good question. And before I even do that, I saw that there in the audience. I went to quick shout out because I had it next to me by chance. This book is called Nige and the Moon by Antoine Edie. I just happened to have it right next to me. I know he's here, so go cop this. Beautiful book. Shout out to you. But with the neon quality, I do actually think about that. I think about it. Sometimes I call it cartoon, but I'm glad I like neon. I'm going to start saying that because I think in the minds of people, cartoon sometimes sounds like a pejorative. But for me, it isn't because that space and that form is really interesting to me. Or in another way of describing it, George would say there's like stories that are more or less like human scale. And so for me, there is like that story I just read feels like very human scale, so to speak, because more or less something that happened without some of the, inflections and like sort of slides away from reality that I maybe do some other times. But It does have that sort of neon quality, which is a really good way of saying it. That thank you. I'll try to cite you in the future when I steal that from you.
Steal away. And is that something that sort of occurs naturally when you're first writing, or is it something that you find you have to layer in as you draft?
It definitely, I don't think about adding it. It's just sort of what the story calls for. It calls for. Oftentimes it's that if I need something to occur in a story, I'll just make it up. And then now I sort of now it's starting to have that quality. But a lot of times I'll have the world in my head for a while, actually. And it's already like a sort of neon world. But what I usually am waiting for actually is to get the feeling and sound and music of the mind and voice of someone who had like been born into that world, kind of get the contours of like what their interiority would, or even their verbal speech would sound like. And so a lot of times I'll have that almost neon-esque worlds kind of there already. And then I gotta fill out what someone who came from that world would sound like. And I think I do the same thing with the human scale stories too. It's just that it's easy for me to talk about what that person sounds like because they sound like the people from where I'm from, like Spring Valley, Rockland County, or here in the Bronx or wherever.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Of course.
Nana, would you like to read?
Sure. Thank you so much, Brookline Booksmith, for having me. And thank you, Alex, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Nana, my other Nana, and Brendan for being here tonight. I'm reading an excerpt from Night Becomes Us. Night veils and reveals her dark face tarted up with stars, neon lit, flossing. In alleys, on corners, users parley with pushers, John's politic with pimps, haggling for that discount strange. Hip hop and thip hop coat the stained glass windows of Cream, NYC's hottest new nightclub. A deconsecrated church where bouncers in muscle tees play St. Pete at the Pearlies. Access granted or denied. Zainab, the ladies' room attendant, sees none of this from her perch on a high stool in the bathroom. Its inky, lacquered black licorice walls shine like mirrors, yet reflect nothing. But it is her job to see, to be ever vigilant in attending to others. She offers a paper napkin, then a shoulder to lean on to a teary-eyed girl mumbling about that motherfucker who thinks he's the shit, but he ain't shit. The aforementioned motherfucker is in the VIP stash, blissed on eights of spades, grinding on some shorty's fatty. At 3 a.m., he will wake up groggy, cuffed to a bedpost, wallet, and Air King Rolly long gone, remembering his girlfriend, his ex now probably, has slapped him on the dance floor, then swarmed off to God knows where. Christ. Zainab is holding said girlfriend's hair back, a lace front weave unlacing in the steamy bathroom as the girl dry heaves into the sink. Preoccupied, she fails to see the woman in the purple sequined mini dress stealing a fresh pack of spearmint and the $28 of her hard-earned tips from the countertop. Her dream fund money. Zainab has purchased everything on offer herself, the candy and gum, mouthwash and lint, the combs, hair gels, scrunchies, safety pins, tampons, Band-Aids, Kleenex, lip gloss, snacks, stain sticks, everything. Yet some girl has it off in her teeny bedazzled clutch. Zainab is well paid and well regarded for her insightful attentions, her crazy glue fix-its for broken stilettos, plastic slippers ready should the bootleg shoe surgery go bust. There's a lotion on hand that's redolent of water lilies and lemongrass, an Appletini air freshener she spritzes in each stall, a crystal garden of fragrances, designer perfumes and vintage atomizers sourced at the variety store off the subway stop in her hood. The first time Zainab had spritzed him with some honeysuckle, her cousin's friend Saeed told her that her name, Zainab, meant fragrant flower in Arabic. This she already knew, but she allowed him his moment, smiling sweetly, rewarded when he leaned into the crook of her neck, close yet not quite touching, an innocent air, bisou, bisou, inhaling deep. She laughed, then taking in his own scent, the honeysuckle, yes, but mixed with something native to him, yet familiar, a heady musk that reminded her of evenings back home, lit by blazing stars and the blood orange embers of saucy, soft soft, soft cecil wood fires burning bright. Right.
Thank you. I love that story. Very
Thank you.
excited to hear part of it. So Walking on Cowrie Shells in general is just a wonderful collection. It has just an absolute wealth of personality coming out of the writing, but also it uses such a breadth and versatility of genre elements. So I would love to hear a bit about the breadth of your reading and how you chose what genres to pull from for different stories in this collection.
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly, people wonder about the breadth of the genres. It just comes from me. Like, I always say, like, my friend said I was Whitman-esque, that I contain multitudes. And I think we all do, right? Like, we're increasingly hashtag. We have so many things that we're interested in. So it didn't even occur to me that I couldn't write a zombie apocalypse because I love zombies, and the zombies are from Africa. And there's like actually zombie lore within that story that I have in there. It just kills you inside, which speaks to like the idea of these revenant relatives that actually come from like Cameroonian ideas of like, people can actually turn you into these Vikongi and have you like, working on their plantations and working on their farms because you become this undead person. So those things are just things that are always interested in me. I mean, yeah, I'm going to have Comic-Con in there because I've gone to Comic-Con, so there's a breadth of stories and genres because those are things that interested me and I'm passionate about. I grew up reading and writing everything. There was always a library in every home that I've, been in. Since the age of 9, I was writing, fan fiction of Star Wars and fan fiction of of Jane Eyre and Jane Austen, before that term fan fiction became a thing. So that is where that comes from, just my natural interests, my natural inclinations, and it kind of just plays out in terms of the language that is used, because that is my background as well. Like, growing up in these different spaces and growing up in Washington, D.C. and then, where people could say, there's a little Southern inflection, people asking you where you finna go. And then growing up in Cameroon, West Africa, where I was amongst like French speakers, but also speaking like Pidgin English and Patois, and which is Camprangais with there, which is mixed in with French and different dialects. And then coming to Brooklyn and spending most of my adult life and schooling there. So it's just like all those inflections, all those interests of mine are all kind of just find their space in the book. And it just feels just part of who I am. So
they all hang together really beautifully, even though they have different elements, which I think is pretty cool, just because it does feel coherent. And part of what makes it coherent is that you change direction so many times within that one book. So thank all of you for sharing pieces of your writing and for answering those first questions. I have some more questions for you before we ultimately turn it over to the audience. And I see we already have some audience questions. First of all, and I think Brandon sort of answered some of this, but maybe Nana, you could answer what about short fiction draws you in? What makes that such a medium of choice for you?
Yeah, and I'm glad that when Brandon mentioned, I feel the same way, and I almost like sometimes I often when like flip it, like I wonder what draws people towards novel, because novels just feel so much more cumbersome, and so like, and I'm doing one now, granted, so maybe I'm a little traumatized. So put an asterisk next to everything I'm saying, but I sometimes I wonder like what makes in sort of like publishing space, like short stories feel like this so othered and like, and even in ourselves, because in the MFA land, like it's so short story-ish, but also I just feel like towards this time period where like concision feels so valuable, short stories seem so well suited. But for me, it's just about that concentration and feeling that nothing is extra, and also feeling as though like I can gesture really powerfully towards something, but not attempt to ever like hold the whole iceberg. And also I think that for me, in terms of like that neon quality you were talking about, I can like turn the saturation pretty high in a short story. And I think that's harder to sustain for a long time. Just because, for a lot of reasons, actually, that it would take a long time to speak to. But to me, I think they offer like a really fun playgrounds. And I also like having the sense of like, I can be so many different things in one book. So the collection feels really more indicative of who I am as like a writer and artist.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with what the other, we'll call you the other Nana. Nana K is
The other Nana.
Nana K.
My new novel.
Together we're like Nana Square. Like I told you, we're like a rap duo. You know,
I know.
coming out in 2023. You know,
Brandon and the Nanas.
Yeah. Oh Lord, I absolutely like, you know, I love the concision and the conciseness, and I love the saturation. Like, you know, people sometimes read that, you know, I write very densely, and I like the fact that I can amplify that, you know, turn that dial up to 100, and people can roll with that for that, you know, because it's a short burst. You know, people have asked me, well, why isn't this a novel? And I'm just like, well, because, you know, it's just like meeting, like having that wonderful, intense love affair or that summer fling, you know, or just imagine meeting somebody on the train and they tell you, girl, did you hear about, and you just listen to that story, and then they get up after, you know, when you reach your stop, and you're just like, wow, I was really impacted. I felt something incredibly deep and true, but this was not the rest, you know, my journey goes on, and with, you know, and I just have to think about it and sit in that. What Brendan was saying about, like, you know, that trick for novels, that's, you know, like thinking of them as several short stories. That's what I had to do to get through my novel. You know, I had to kind of do like these Jedi mind tricks on myself and say, okay, it's okay, don't get scared, you know. And I feel like doing that actually allowed my, you know, my novels not, you know, to kind of, my novel that I was working on to end up not having a lot of filler pages, and like, you know, where it would have lagged, maybe, you know, I thought of like these different chapters and different sections as like really tight kind of storytelling modules, so that it pushed me to kind of like allow them to kind of have their own arc within the larger arc of the novel. And there's a, you know, an intensity to that I enjoy, because I'm not a person who likes to kind of play with different genres. We've talked about play with different languages, kind of be in different characters in different spaces. And that allowed me to kind of have the, you know, feel the ability to kind of break free of, like, you know, having to kind of feel like, oh, I'm stuck with one person for all these 300 and something pages, and one, you know, I don't have to do that. It's okay. You can jump into this one's head and, you know, let it go, you know. So that's how I did it.
Well, and Anana was saying sort of the gesturing at things without completely, you know, going over them point by point. The short story doesn't really underserve those ideas either, because sometimes that gesture is a lot more powerful than a long description, you know, of dozens of chapters. So it's
exactly. I was thinking when you were saying it, people always ask me the same thing. Why isn't this or that a novel? The question really is, for a lot of these novels, why isn't this a short story? Like, in reality.
I have plenty of love. I have love letters to several novels, but it is what it is, you know.
And I'm not trying to say, like, I'm not trying to like be funny about it. Like, it's true. Like, you know, like.
Yeah.
I mean, so for the first time ever, I'm like teaching in an MFA program, and almost all my students are writing novels, all of them, and which feels like a major shift in the MFA culture. Like there's a disturbance in the force where MFA students are suddenly all bringing novels into workshop. But, you know, like one of them, you know, they were like, I wrote this as a story, but like, I think it could be a novel. And everyone was like, yes, this should totally be a novel. And I was like, listen, this has a short story shape. Like, you guys, like a novel, like, it's not enough to have an idea. Like, one idea cannot drive a novel. Like it simply cannot.
Right.
Like a novel needs like 3 or 4 different engines driving it, you know, like trying to power a novel on like a short story momentum is a recipe for pain, suffering, disaster, you know. And so, I mean, it is interesting. I think, and honestly, though, that is the thing that you don't know until you try to turn a short story into a novel. Like, that is a level of misery that you just cannot conceive of until you've done it, and then you never do it again. Like, you just
one more time for folks in the back.
You just don't make that mistake again, you know. And
it's
so, like,
painful.
I'm there trying to be like, maybe it's a story though. But, you know, I mean, you can't protect them. You can't protect them from the mistakes they have to make. You just really can't. You're just there to be supportive as they run off and discover for themselves.
Yeah, I think because, like, you know, the novel is always treated as like, you know, the legitimate art form, and then, like, you know, short stories are the red-headed stepchildren of like the publishing world. Sometimes people just, they want to kind of feel like that. Oh, I've got that gravitas. I'm just like, your short story, those gestures and allowing your readers, the gestures and allowing your readers to kind of be in that kind of meaning making pursuit with you, just it's so beautiful to me. I love that kind of concision of language.
Yep.
I write, like I say, very densely. Like my sentences, I don't waste time. Like every word better be pulling its own weight, So I feel that, there's something beautiful and wonderful in that pursuit. It's the same thing I say about poetry. Like, there's no wasted moments in a poem, right? So I feel like that's an exercise that's incredibly important for I teach as well, and my students to kind of learn that. But I've also tried to honor their, novelistic pursuits, So it's just like, but I also like, it's one of those things, you let them fly and do what they must, but also let them know that, there's all kinds of ways to skin a cat. And sometimes your form is part of that journey, like figuring out the form that's best for the story that you want to tell. So.
Totally.
Amen.
Well, that speaks a lot to sort of the things that are powerful about short story and what are not easiest, but the things that make it sort of like the focus on the one idea and the limitations of the pages, and the joy that can be had there. But I think one of the things that's always interesting to hear from writers is what is the satisfying challenge that goes into the form that they're writing? Because it's not just like easy flowing writing, like it came out in one day and it was perfect, but the challenge that you set for yourself that each story sort of achieves for you. Are there challenges in the short story that you set for yourself and find the most satisfaction in?
Yeah, I can. One of the ones I think about, and I had to think about this recently because I was talking to someone else who was writing a longer form story, but I feel the same issue. Like when I'm writing a story that has like a pretty like intense conceit or something, and is not, again, like hardcore neon, and you don't have so much time to like make that the rules, if you will, clear. And it's almost like a tutorial, but you don't want any pages of your story to feel like tutorial, right? So, and I think video games make me think of this. Like the games I really like have like an invisible tutorial space where they won't be like, press A to jump over the thing. They'll just put the obstacle in front of you and they assume you're smart enough to figure it out, right? It'll be more simple than it will be later on in the game, but it's like this like invisible tutorial. And coming up with those with a story where like it's like, I remember being like, some stories of mine, like it's hard for me to describe them, but like, let's say every day this town resets in a nuclear explosion, but also the people are, it's like Groundhog Day, but ends in a nuclear explosion, but also people everyone knows. And also the main girl is stronger than everyone else. And she misses her mom. And making that clear and like make the reader understand that in like less than 3 pages is so tough. And to me, that's a really fun challenge. Basically the indoctrination period, the tutorial space, whatever you want to call it, that early parts of the story. George does it really, really intensely because George doesn't care. George Saunders, I mean. I say George because that's my friend, like my name dropping, but like George, he does it really intensely right in the beginning. Like you don't know what's going on. He's just like, we're going to go or we're going to go. And I really love that because it asks for you to be really precise, but also asks for generosity on the reader's part. And that's one of my favorite challenges of the short form.
I love the invisible tutorial. I'm going to steal that.
I got that from some actual video game thing from Game Maker's Toolkit.
I mean, I was flashing back hardcore to Pokemon Legends Arceus, and I was like, why is this tutorial so long? And the minute the tutorial was over, I was like, oh, I get it. This is hard. I don't understand how this works. I'm going to go back.
I'm playing it now too. We'll talk about that later.
Yes. Yeah. I have so many yeah. I mean, the challenges of the short form. I mean, for me, the challenge is always, it's very similar to what Nana was just saying. It is that thing, for me, the hardest part is always the first 5 pages. And I don't write very conceit forward stories. My stories are very sort of austere domestic realism over here in Richard Yates territory. But it's always so hard for me to sort of find the voice that is most convincing to the reader and like that will get the story off the ground. And so the most challenging part is like trying to find that right combination of character, like starting incident, momentum, plot, setting, how to get the reader into the dream of the story and to get the story going all at once, because you don't have 20 pages like in a novel. Like the first 20 pages of a novel, like pull any novel off your shelf and read those first 20 pages and it's just it's like barely even it's barely even prose. Like it's not even writing. Like there's nothing in it. It's just the wheels getting going. And in a short story, if you do all that sort of schematic heavy lifting, it shows so obviously. So I find that the hardest part is to sort of get the reader down and into the voice and reality and the world of the story. And it's hard. It's so hard. It is the hardest part. But I feel like once I get through the first 5 pages of the story, everything else is cake. It's just, everything else is just taking the character to the therapist and figuring out what their damage is and figuring out how to write that. Like that stuff is so much easier than having to build the world of the story and the voice of the story and to get the reader into it in a way that feels artistic and authentic and aesthetically coherent with the story itself. That is like, and I still don't know how it happens. And like every time I read a story, I'm like, how did they do this? Like, how does the story, because it's like there's a moment, there's an instant in every story where the membrane opens, the reader pops in, and then it closes and it's sealed forever and the reader's just in the story. And it just is, it seems like magic to me every single time I read a story. And I have no idea how it happens, but you know, so for me, that is the hardest part, is those first 5 pages, because you've got to do everything in such a tight window.
Yeah, challenges. Honestly, like for me, like I'm very voice driven, like Nana K was saying, like I'm very, very voice driven. So once I hear the voice in my head, and my first paragraphs and first pages for the most part stay unchanged over the course of time. Like, if that voice character is speaking to me, it's almost like I'm possessed. Like, I'm listening to them and they're kind of, becoming like the second voice in my head saying, this is what's going on. And let me just take you around. Like, like they take my hand, they take me down the garden path, we round the mulberry bush, over the hills and through the woods, and that's how it goes. So once I get that, but if that doesn't come to me, and I'm like just trying to make myself write, like like a grown up who's supposed to write every day and hasn't had to wait for the stars to be in alignment and the sun to be in, in this equinox or whatever. Like if I'm not trying to do that, and I'm just trying to kind of go and not wait for that voice, that's when it becomes a little bit harder, and I have to kind of push myself to kind of get into that space and to be thinking about all these little notes and what have you that I've taken on things that have been interested in me in the world. But once I'm voice driven, it's just like it feels almost magical. It just falls into space and into place with me. So yeah.
Thank you. So speaking of characters damage, I'd say something that's true of all 3 of you as writers is that part of the intensity and saturation of your writing is the emotional intensity. Like all 3 of you write stories where at the end you feel that punch, you feel everything the characters felt, and you don't forget it. Like you can walk away from these books for months at a time, and though that sensation is still there because they're so resonantly written. And that's true for all 3 of you. And I think that incredibly intimate emotional stories like that have the flip side of emotional vulnerability. So I'm just wondering, do you find writing to be more taxing or cathartic, or does it depend on the story and the day?
I'll jump in with that because I had one story that people have been asking me to read a lot, which is Schoolyard Cannibal. And it was a story that almost didn't make it. It's a prose poem. It almost didn't make it into my book. It's incredibly personal. I think, they always say like, write what you know, and then we write from our own personal experiences. But I'd always been a person who kind of like, took my own experiences as like a very kernels. Like there'll be a character that is kind of like a human karaoke machine in my Comic-Con story. And that's me. Like I love to burst into songs sometimes. So I'll give them I'll cannibalize my own life in little quirks that I have to give to my characters. But Schoolyard Cannibal for me was the story that was talking about microaggressions, talking about what it meant to be an African growing up in the United States and seeing, yourself always kind of placed in this, like, you know, your culture always kind of like denigrated, and everything was negative. And that was a very, very personal story to write. And it was difficult. And I still find it difficult to talk about, you know. So I would say that, like, you know, one of my professors was talking about bleeding on the page and, you know, write into where it hurts. And that was the story that was the most of a challenge for me to kind of be in that space, along with Kinks, which was also written kind of cathartically after a breakup, you know, that I had when I was trying to make sense of it. So I have, like, you know, a woman who's also she's questioning her African identity, and she's with a kind of like very Afrocentric, Afro power firebrand of a man kind of, you know, and he's the one who's kind of pushing against that. And that kind of, you know, interaction where your kind of your identity and your love are kind of intertwined was also interesting to me to write after I'd gone through a bad breakup. But for them, you know, so I guess it depends on the story, like, you know, where you feel like that deeper sense of intimacy. All of my stories feel kind of intimate and mean something to me, but some of them came more born of pain and personal experience than others. So
yeah, I mean, I very often feel nothing when I write. Like when the writing's going well, I feel nothing. I am just like in the flow state of the story. And I also like to sort of take little bits from my life and my personality and to sort of fold it up in the character like a little dumpling and send it out into the world to be attacked by the story in some sense. But yeah, I mean, you know, when I try to write, and I wonder if it was the same teacher who told me to write into where it hurts. That would be fascinating, Nana. But I also try to sort of lean into discomfort. But when I'm actually writing, I feel nothing usually. I'm just writing. But there are some moments and there are some stories where after I've written it, I've just like had to lie down flat on my back. And one of those instances was the middle section of my novel, Real Life, which is like this hyper lyric monologue where the character talks about a lot of horrible things that have happened to him. And when I wrote that section, I didn't write again for like 3 weeks or something. Like I just couldn't even, and honestly wrote that section, put it in the book, did not touch it again until I read from it at a reading like a month ago, like in August or something. Like did not touch it, like couldn't even bear to read it over to edit it, like just needed it far, far away from me. And there's certain scenes in a book I'm working on now about my family and about growing up in Alabama, things that are just like that feel very, you know, so tied to things that had happened to me when I was younger. And I was having August 2020, I was having these horrible dreams. And so I started working on that book as a way to like exercise a lot of those traumas. And the minute I started working on that book, those dreams went away. And so there are certain projects I have where I'm like sealing off the bad vibes in the book and just setting it aside. But for the most part, it's, you know, it's just when you sit down to write, I'm so focused on the story that I don't even know that I have a body. But there's some stories which do have a kind of talismanic effect, and I find that very curious.
Right? It's weird, isn't it? Like you're talking about that bad juju is kind of like, you know, a vessel. Hey, take that, you know, keep it far away from me.
Put it somewhere far.
Yes. Yeah.
Then the joke's on you because then you have to read it.
Exactly.
My God, Brandon, like there's so many people like I mentioned that story and then people want me to read it immediately. I was like, no, I actually said it so I didn't have to I didn't want to have to read from it, you know.
That you took the wrong lesson from the
but it's so many people, you know, resonated. I'm glad I did write it because I say that it wasn't supposed to end up in the book, but people resonated with them who had those similar experiences. So I understand why it needed to be out in the world, but please don't make me read it again. Please don't. All right. Sorry.
Sometimes they'll tell you, like at the event, sometimes they'll be like, read this, you know. It's crazy. But that's the real shit. I really, everything that you guys have just said, I'm like, there's like the exorcism piece, but it's always like for me, like unknowing. And writing has a lot of different phases, you know. There's like the initial put it down phase. And for me, the like tough discovery, weird, oh shit, like this is cathartic cathartic or also damaging part is in the revision, where I'll realize like I left the heart right out because it's like a dad shaped space or something, or a mom shaped space. And I'm like, okay. And it usually be someone else will point to it. And I'm like, okay. And then I just be really sad for a while. And even that story I read today, like the vibes have to be good or else I won't read it. Like I have like this secret game in my mind all the time where I'm like, these vibes are not good. I'm not going to do this. So like, because it's just harder because when it's real, it comes from somewhere. And I think for a while it's funny. I remember hearing people, I think they got very anti the idea of writing being cathartic because I think people over sort of sold that idea. And then like therapy is therapy, writing is writing. And that is very true. But also writing, it can be a space to, I like the idea of sealing stuff off. And sometimes what's interesting is sometimes the writing knows before you do. I have stories that like are all, other people think they're all about like depression, anxiety. And I wrote them way before I ever self-identified as having either of those. And then I read them back like, oh shit, you know? And so it's, sometimes it's the exorcism you're doing on yourself before you even realize. So I think it's all the things. Sometimes you're just there. Sometimes you're scared and this is like your safe place. Sometimes you have to sort of dissociate and you're just in the work. And sometimes you like knowingly going to a hard place. It can be a lot of different things.
Yeah. Amen to all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have more questions, but we also have a few really good questions from the audience. So I'd love to get to some of those. First of all, Quentin asks, Quentin, by the way, Quentin Collins is a great poet who lives in Brookline and is amazing. So you should check out his books. He says, I love the music in all of your readings. How do you each approach rhythm in your writing?
I try to read it.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. I was just like, there was like a pause. So I was just gonna jump in.
I try to read out loud when I'm like working on it. And I don't know how to describe the like syllable energy of like trying to hit something right. But there's I don't know, there's a certain rhythm that's sort of in you. And I try to, sometimes saying out loud helps me find that. But it's hard for me to say how I really arrive at that, other than like I'll read it out loud in the drafting and revision phase and try to feel what feels like right.
Yeah, I think that it's very natural for me. It's innate. Like I've been writing, like I said, since I was 9 years old. So that like these little, like something to me will just sense that a sentence needs one more beat or something, like that musicality and lyricism, especially because I'm voice driven. Like once I'm in a voice and like, you know, and it whether it's like I call my voices, like one of them is lyrical and sermonic, and when I'm in that lyrical sermonic, I know what the voice sounds like. Some of my voices, like, you know, or like, you know, sexy, sinister, you know, I got so they've all got voices. One of them is honky talk meets hard boiled, you know. So like I know their voices. I love it. And I know it's like hearing your mother's voice from another room. You just know what it sounds like, you know, so it comes. But when I'm trying to teach it, as you know, you're so often you're trying to teach craft, I do tell my students, and I, you know, especially with my dialogue, sometimes I read it out loud. And I tell my students to read their sentences out loud to kind of feel where the flow goes. And yeah, but that is very much something that I think it's like Kwame is saying, like I'm just like it's just like something is missing. If you and you know, sometimes I, you know, listen to music, especially when I'm doing something that's kind of, you know, has a lot, that's very braggadocious, it's got a little swagger. Maybe I listen to some hip hop. So sometimes, you know, there's some things you can do to kind of zhuzh that process along. But yeah, that stuff is very much an internal kind of lyricism and musicality that tends to come through my sentences. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thirding all of that. I mean, the reading it out loud really, really helps. I mean, something that I found really interesting is that, so I read out loud as I'm writing, and I'm always looking for the rhythm, and I feel like I trust my ear more than I trust my brain sometimes. And interestingly, the first time I heard the audiobook version of one of my books, I was so alarmed at how close the actor's interpretation was to the voice I'd heard in my head. And I was like, how did he know? And then one of my friends was like, Brandon, the commas, it's the punctuation. Like the punctuation punctuation and the direction. Like that's how you punctuation is scoring. That's how he knows the rhythm of the sentences. And I was like, right. That's right. When you punctuate according to your own internal sense of rhythm and musicality, and like your voice is encased in your punctuation. And that seems like really obvious, but it is somehow my brain had not made that connection at all. And the first time you hear someone else interpret your writing is either a great experience or they are not in the pocket, you know? And you never know which one it's going to be until you hear it, which is another layer to that whole thing, is the interpretation of the word.
Yes, a good period.
You said ear. That's exactly what people say. I have a good ear. And I never thought of like the music and everything, because I played the flute and marching band and everything. But, I was like, oh, I wonder, is that maybe just ear? Like, how do you gain that? Can we teach that, Brenda? Can we teach that? Sorry, Nanika, you were saying?
No, I was just saying a good period. A good period does everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Poets know it. Poets be knowing. This is not news to the poets. Right? The poets know.
Yeah, they do. They definitely
do. It changed my life taking, I took a bunch of poetry classes when I was in the MFA, and like getting to the point where I'm thinking on the syllable level, it like made my writing a different thing.
Yeah. When I was teaching poetry, I realized, I use a lot of slant rhymes. I use a lot of alliteration. Then you start seeing all those things that you were doing already, but then now I can like name it and I can say, okay, what about this? Because even sight rhymes, I'm realizing, my words sometimes visually on the page, they look like they're married together. But I was just doing that, instinctively, So poets, you're right. Shout out to our poets out there.
Yes, indeed.
Shout out to the poets.
Every moment. Let's see. Haley says,
was that a cat over there, Alex?
And it was a different cat than the cat that went by before.
I was like, the cat's like a typewriter, like
yeah. Haley says, hi, thank you all for doing this. What stories or collections do you return to again and again, particularly when you're feeling stuck?
Well, I return to Miley Malloy's collection, Both Ways is the Only Way I Want It. I come back to that book again and again, especially the story Lovely Rita. Like, that story is a miracle. And the story The Girlfriend, which is like one of the best stories ever written. It's incredible. And I come back to Ben Marcus's Leaving the Sea. That book is phenomenal. And I think I also come back to Mavis Gallant. Mavis Gallant, whenever I'm lost in the world, I just reread The Remission to remember what a short story can do. And of course, I come back to Danielle Evans's brilliant stories. Boys Go to Jupiter. How does she do it? The sad pivot is like the greatest invention in the short story the last 50 years. She is just on another level. So Danielle Evans' story, especially Boys Go to Jupiter, Richard of York Gave Battle in Vain. She is just a phenomenal, incredible writer. So yeah, those are some of the people I come to again and again.
Yes, Danielle is I read her for the first time I read Office of Historical Corrections for the first time recently, and I was like, there was things in that really like fucked me up. She's great. I think she's like really like cold, like really, really. But Dantiel too, I think Milk Blood Heat, like that took me out of my, and usually like I'll just take like a story or so. Like there's like usually it's like a certain story that like changes my life. ZZ Packer was huge for me. I have like props. I don't know why I have so many books near me. This is where I'm writing, as you can probably tell. George Saunders is there's a bunch of but I won't go and like read 10th of December through though, but I'll go read like Escape from Spiderhead, and I'll go to Pastoralia and read like Sea Oak, and so yeah, and I'm just trying to think of other Nafisa and Jamel, who like the other people who could have been in this event with us today. Obviously incredible. Nafisa Thompson Spires and Jamel Brinkley, their stories are incredible as well.
Yeah, for me it just depends, like what kind of like what I'm trying to access, like if it's like if it's that kind of like that lyricism and that kind of trying to be in that musical, or I'm trying to to get into pathos. It depends, like I'm doing high fantasy. Right now I'm trying to write a fantasy short story. So everything is just like, depends. But like some faves, of course, Octavia Butler, James Tipsy Jr., who is AKA Alice Sheldon, Karen Russell, Kevin Brockmeyer, Gloria Naylor, Toni Morris. I mean, just so many. I could go on. I could just go on. You say my magical realist folks, or my, or like my African greats folks, So I've got them like depending upon the moment and what I'm trying to access. It could go all over the map, As I always tell my students, I read very widely and wildly because sometimes it might be a comic book. Who knows? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's that Kevin Brockmere story where it's like the floor is coming down on the town? It's like it's called The Ceiling or something. It's so good. And also I forgot about the one that Arrival was based off. That story of your life. That makes me feel like
Yang. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
You can't mess up with that. Yeah.
He shows you that a lot of the novels should be short stories to the max. That story of your life alone. It's such a flex. I teach it all the time. It's such a crazy story.
Also, that story by Jim. I was just gonna say that story by Jim Shepard about the tidal wave.
Oh yeah!
Oh my goodness!
He has a couple. Jim Shepard has a couple of really good ones. The football one too, like trample their bodies or trample their. I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, so good.
You guys basically look at my whole teaching archive. I don't know all them stories right there.
I know. I PDFs on PDFs. I got so many PDFs ready to go.
Oh,
like racks on racks on racks.
Word.
Oh yes.
Word.
This is why people need to put down their novels for a while and just pick up short stories, because there's no end of what we could be reading.
For real.
Like, are we starting turf wars? Are we starting beef right here with the novel? Brandon, I'm blaming you, right?
Well, I have been known to be inflammatory. Read the novel, so I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, we have a question from Aaron, which is about filthy animals. One thing that kept hitting home for me was how cohesive the book felt overall. How did you decide to make it a short story collection rather than a novel? Or do you think there's some fluidity about the form overall? I think this sort of harkens back to what you said about constellations of stories.
Yeah. Well, there are people who do believe that form is just a capitalist marketing scheme. I'm not one of these people. I'm very conservative reform. There are rules, and but I'm only strict about it with myself. Other people can do what they want. I love a sort of what is it moment with a book. But for myself, it was always short stories, and I started writing those stories because I wanted to write a longer book, and I wanted to follow characters across several stories. And it was really discovering Mavis Gallant's linked stories. She has a few suites of stories. She has the Lynette Muir stories, and she has the Corrette sister stories, and she has the Henri Griep stories. And like discovering the fact that you could like write a set of stories with recurring characters, I was like, oh my God, of course. It's like the cartoons in the newspaper. Like you can just have them come back again and again. And so I set out to write, a suite of stories about those characters. And the real challenge was figuring out how to fit it into a book, because I knew that I didn't have enough of those stories for it to like be its own book. And I knew that it wasn't a novella. I knew that it was stories. And so then it was just like, how do you marry the linked story form with what I call the interstitial stories, which is the stories that go in between all the stories. And that was just a matter of finding the right rhythm, because you can't put them all together because that makes it too dense. You don't want them to be too spread apart. And so really it was like finding the right amount of space that needed to be between each of the stories to like accentuate or de-accentuate like various modalities in the stories themselves. And then it was just, like arranging a score and music. So, but I knew that it would be stories right from the very beginning, because I was very serious about being a short story writer. So I never considered it being anything else. It was just trying to find the right structure for the sort of larger manuscript.
Just great. This leads right into Shannon's question, which is for all of you. And can you share any words of wisdom about the choices you made with respect to ordering your collections, chronological, thematic, or otherwise?
Yeah, I have a whole thing to say about this. And I forgot when we were talking about stories on Brian Washington a lot. Incredible, 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 incredible. I think of it like kind of like a mixtape, like a mix doing like an album thing. And so like for me, with my first book, it's like there's a lot of like we talked about that neonness, and there's also or like a surreal quality, but also like some of them are pretty intense and kind of violent, maybe. So and I went like I don't know, I went the energy to go like this in terms of a lot of different things. But the first story is sort of like this right in your face thing that in case they're like, this guy sucks and they throw my book in the garbage, I was like, at least like I caught them with that one thing saying something that mattered to me, kind of about extrajudicial violence against Black people. And then the second story is like this short interlude of like my real life, the story I read before. It's like, this is actually Nana, like the person, really quickly, I love you, mom, kind of. It's like that. I imagine like in an album that like 1 minute and like 32-second interlude, you know, and then it's like the next story is back into that very neon, very surreal, kind of back into like the regular scheduled program. And all the way through, you kind of have this sort of like curation of vibes, basically, that feels hopefully very intentional. But and it's not just alternating, but it's like what feels good against this, and even like what, like that story ends. I hope you can be proud of me. And then the third story starts, suck one and die. And that's kind of funny to me. And like that kind of like, you know, so kind of having some type of intentionality and energy that you could kind of like play with all the way through, and ending with that nuclear explosion. That feels like, for me, like doing the most intense, wild thing I could do at the end of my powers at that time. So I kind of feel like trying to make an album that way is how I think about the ordering and chronology of a short story collection.
Yeah, for me, people ask me like, what did you decide went together? Because I feel like like because I am interested in so many different genres, and I'm interested in telling and speaking in so many different voices. It was just like, how did you marry these? And I was just, I think some of it was like what Nana was saying, like, like I wanted some stuff to be like what the thesis for my career. Like, when you read the first story in my collection, you're just like, okay, this is gonna be a little crazy. This is gonna be a little gonzo. There gonna be different voices. It's told in 2 volumes. One is it first person plural, like, told from like an adoptive parents, like they're in the United States. And we get the next one, the girl is speaking in French in the first line, and she's telling you, I give good read, and she's speaking in comme franglais and in pidgin. And it's so it just like, this is what it's going to be like. She's wilding out. I say that she's got the disposition of an Uzi. So I feel like people need to get, know like, bam, that's what you're going to get. Like, you just kind of feel off kilter, and it's unexpected because it's such a tense juxtaposition, so that that's what you can expect throughout the rest of the novel, the collection. So, I mean, I think I came of age, like, what Brandon was talking about, these like linked short story collections. Like I felt like, I thought like some things that were called, I was reading Olive Kitteridge, and I felt like the 12 Tribes of Hattie was a short story collection, but people were calling it a novel. I felt like there were so many things that people were calling a novel, like A Visit from this Goon Squad. I was like, is that a novel or short story collections? But there was such a an overarching linked. And I was like, oh, I'm not doing really linked, but I think my stories are linked, by themes and the voices and the language, my preoccupation with language. But I just wanted people to get a sense that anything could happen. So you might, turn a corner, and next thing you know, you're at Comic-Con. You turn another corner, and next thing you know, you're in a Black charismatic church. And then you turn another corner, you go down that alley, and you're in a nightclub. So, but I think that zigging and zagging is what I wanted to kind of get people a sense that you feel a little off kilter when you move from space to space, but they all feel in some ways part of a world, because the world is not clean and pristine and manicured. Anything could happen. So.
Thank you. We have one more question from Michael. And at that point, we're going to be out of time. So here's Michael's question. Do you try to write stories that you think the world needs to hear, or stories that you need to tell?
Well, for me, I'm just trying to have a good time. When I sit down to write, I'm trying to follow my interests, and to follow my interest into places that don't bore me. And that is my first and primary and perhaps only sort of preoccupation, is just like, is this boring to me? If I were to sort of stumble across this, if I were to encounter this in the wild, would I find this interesting? You know, like if someone were to take a screenshot of this paragraph and share it on Twitter, and if I didn't know I had written it, would I be like, this person's onto something? Or is it, which has happened to me. Sometimes I like encounter my own words out of context and I'm like, who said this? This is really, this is interesting. I like this, which is perhaps the best way to encounter your work. But, you know, I try to write things that I don't find boring and that wouldn't make me feel ashamed to have other people talking about them or reading them. And so I think sometimes in doing that, perhaps if I have something interesting to say about the world, then those stories are what the world needs. And if I don't, then maybe they're not what the world needs. But at the end of the day, I can't take on that responsibility when I sit down to write. I am just trying to follow my interest to places that are unexpected and interesting and alive to me. And that is hard enough. Honestly, that might seem trivial, but that is just like really hard to do, is to just like write stuff that does not bore you to tears. Like that job is hard enough without worrying about what the world needs. Like it's, so that's what, you know, that's what I'm trying to do in my own writing, is to sort of hit that first barrier, which of, is this interesting? Would I be ashamed to have this read in the group chats? You know, that's really where I'm at when I'm sitting down to write.
Word. One of my professors in school, I think he kind of like almost like branded me with something I can't let go of. One of the prompts he said I gave us to do was write a story to save the world. And already like that's like that's spooky, you know. But for like someone with my like sort of, I don't know, I felt happy that he had said that. But the story I ended up writing was a much earlier version of that Things My Mother Said story, which of all my stories probably the least issue. I mean, there's tons of issues in it, but like least issue-y compared to some of my other stuff. And I guess like for me, like to answer your question, Michael, I feel like it's kind of like, yes, I think that, and I say it so much as a teacher, that you saying your essential story, your essential self, presenting that is what we need. So for me, it's like by doing that, by having fun, because I also think like engagement and fun is like my like sort of bedrock, and doing that in a way that feels true to me, the real shit that the world quote unquote needs will like come through. I just believe that at this point. And so I don't necessarily have to say like, let me go try to like save the world, or like let me try to go do the thing that the world needs no more. It's just that like by being yourself in this world that is already like what it is, it just so happens. And maybe this is like me like thinking a very convenient like untruth or something, but I think that it's true that if you are really yourself and present that like as honestly and truly as you can, in some level we need that. And so I think that that's my way of feeling like I write stuff that is important and not feel like an asshole, like egomaniac.
Yeah, for me, I know that, and I talk about it, you know, in that schoolyard accountable piece about like growing up and dealing with symbolic annihilation, where you don't see yourself like, you know, accurately depicted in film reels and books, and just not like seeing yourself like in your full majesty, nuance, like, you know, not the native savage, not like, you know, like I just wanted like authentic depictions, like, you know, and I think that's happening more and more. And I just said, oh, let me just be part of the voices of putting that out there. Like, you know, if I can, you know, be one of those, you know, storytellers that is not going to have like these really reductive, essentialist, you know, depictions of African womanhood, of Black womanhood, of, you know, let me add my voice, you know, to that, like that chorus. And that was important to me. And I think what Nana K is saying about like just, you know, showing up on the page as your, you know, as your authentic self, and that's needed, and especially in this world of like, you know, airbrushing and simulacrums, being authentic starts to feel like novel. You know, it's like, oh, that's real. You know, so that's what I try to do.
Well, that brings us past our hour, and I want to say thank you again so much to all three of you for being here tonight. It's a tremendous privilege to get to be in conversation with all of you. And if anyone in the audience has not yet read any of their books, you should go and do so. Written phenomenal collections, and are some of my favorite books of the last several years. So thank you all for being here tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank y'all. Big applause for y'all.
Thank you.